The gavel was halfway to the bench when the courtroom doors burst open, and Rose's heart stopped as three strangers in expensive suits called out the name she thought the world had forgotten. "Your Honor, please wait. Hi, my beautiful family. Let me begin with a prayer straight from the heart. Dear God, please bless every soul watching this video. Fill their lives with peace, joy, and endless love. Amen. Welcome back, my family. You are not just viewers. You are my light during the dark days, and my reason to keep going. To all new family members, welcome to the family. Please subscribe to the channel and introduce yourself in the comments. I truly want to know more about you. My beloved family, every story I bring is not just words. It is my sweat, my sleepless nights, and my sacrifice. When you leave early, it cuts deep as if my hard work is unseen and my voice unheard. Please stay till the end. I love you. Now let's begin the story. Judge Patricia Coleman's weathered hand froze midair, the wooden hammer suspended like a sword of Damocles over Rose Washington's future. In the suffocating silence of courtroom 4B, Rose felt every eye turn toward the disruption, but her own gaze remained fixed on her cuffed hands resting in her lap. 63 years old, and she'd learned that hope was a luxury she could no longer afford. The prosecutor, a sharp-suited man named Peterson, who'd spent the last 3 days painting her as a menace to society, shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defendant has been found guilty on all counts. Sentencing should proceed. I'll determine what should proceed in my courtroom, Counselor. Judge Coleman's voice cut through Peterson's objection like ice through silk. She studied the 3 figures now standing at the back of the nearly empty courtroom. A black woman in a tailored navy blazer, a Latino man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a young black man whose expensive watch caught the fluorescent light. Rose's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking woman named Janet Mills, who'd handled her case with all the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list, whispered urgently in her ear. "Do you know these people?" Rose's throat constricted. Something about their faces tugged at memory's edges, but 20 years of hard living had blurred so many details. She shook her head slightly, though her heart hammered against her ribs with an intensity that surprised her. "Your Honor," the woman in navy stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor with measured confidence. "My name is Dr. Keisha Williams. I'm a pediatric surgeon at Johns Hopkins. These are my colleagues," she gestured to her companions. "Dr. Michael Torres, a federal prosecutor, and David Chun, senior partner at Chun, Rodriguez and Associates. We're here regarding Rose Washington." Judge Coleman leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light. "This court doesn't recognize you as counsel for the defendant, Dr. Williams. On what grounds do you seek to address this court?" The woman, Keisha, lifted her chin with a dignity that made Rose's chest ache with something she couldn't name. "On the grounds of truth, Your Honor. This woman is about to receive a life sentence for protecting her community from drug dealers. But before you pass judgment, you need to know who Rose Washington really is." Peterson's face flushed red. "Objection. The defendant was found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon and conspiracy to." "I know what she was found guilty of." Keisha's voice rose, cutting through the prosecutor's words with surgical precision. "I also know that 20 years ago, when I was 13 years old and hadn't eaten in 3 days, this woman took me into her home. When I was sleeping in abandoned buildings and stealing food to survive, Rose Washington fed me, clothed me, and told me I was worth something." The courtroom seemed to shrink around Rose's thundering heartbeat. Her hands began to shake as fragments of memory crashed together, like puzzle pieces finding their places. A skinny girl with defiant eyes and braided hair. A voice that cracked when she tried to act tough, but trembled when she thought no one was listening. "Keisha." "Your Honor," the Latino man, Michael, stepped forward, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I was 11 when Mama Rose found me digging through dumpsters behind the corner market on 5th Street. My mother had overdosed. I had nowhere to go. The system had failed me, but Rose Washington didn't. Rose's vision blurred as the third figure, David, moved closer to the defendant's table. Even through her tears, she could see the small scar above his left eyebrow, the one he'd gotten when he fell off his bicycle, trying to impress the older kids on Maple Street. "And I was 9, David said, his voice breaking slightly, "when I watched my father beat my mother to death and then turn the gun on himself. I was found 3 days later, hiding in our basement, too terrified to speak. Foster homes couldn't handle me. I was labeled difficult, traumatized, unreachable. But Mama Rose," his voice caught. "Mama Rose saw past all of that." Judge Coleman's stern expression had softened into something resembling wonder. She looked from the 3 successful adults to the woman sitting in shackles at the defendant's table. "Mrs. Washington, do you know these people?" Rose tried to speak, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. "My babies." She lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks as she really looked at them for the first time. "My babies came back." The silence in the courtroom stretched taut as a violin string. Rose felt the weight of 20 years collapse into this single moment, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously as she stared at the 3 people who had once been her world. Judge Coleman cleared her throat, her voice softer now but still commanding. "Dr. Williams, while I appreciate the emotional nature of this interruption, this court has procedures. The defendant has been found guilty by a jury of her peers. Unless you have new evidence or grounds for appeal, we have testimony, Your Honor." David stepped forward, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the scared 9-year-old boy who used to hide behind Rose's skirts. Character testimony that should have been presented during the trial, but wasn't, because we didn't know she needed us. Janet Mills, Rose's public defender, looked bewildered. "Your Honor, I wasn't aware of any character witnesses. Mrs. Washington never mentioned. Because I told her not to." Rose's voice cracked as she finally spoke, her words barely audible. "Told her not to drag anyone else into this mess. Told her I did what I did, and I'd take what was coming." Keisha moved closer to the defendant's table, her medical training evident in how she assessed Rose's condition with worried eyes. The years hadn't been kind. Rose's hair was more gray than black now, her face lined with the kind of weariness that came from carrying the world's burdens. But her eyes still held that fierce protective love that had saved 3 broken children. "Mrs. Washington," Keisha said gently, "you saved our lives. Now let us save yours." Peterson stood again, his frustration palpable. "Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt to manipulate the court's emotions. The defendant was found guilty of threatening drug dealers with a weapon, of organizing neighborhood vigilante activities, of protecting children." Michael's voice boomed through the courtroom, his prosecutor's training evident in how he commanded attention. "Your Honor, may I ask what Mr. Peterson knows about growing up in neighborhoods where 12-year-olds are recruited as drug runners? Where mothers have to choose between buying groceries and paying protection money to gangs?" Rose watched in amazement as her Michael, quiet, thoughtful Michael who used to stutter when nervous, faced down the prosecutor with unwavering confidence. "I know the law, Dr. Torres," Peterson shot back. "And the law doesn't allow citizens to take justice into their own hands." "No," David interjected, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to winning high-stakes negotiations. "But the law also recognizes character evidence. And we're here to testify about the character of a woman who literally saved our lives." Judge Coleman studied the 3 advocates, then looked at Rose. "Mrs. Washington, did you know these individuals were coming?" Rose shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "Haven't seen them in, Lord, must be 15 years. Maybe more. They went off to college, started their lives. I didn't want to be a burden." "A burden?" Keisha's voice broke slightly. "Mama Rose, you were never a burden. You were everything." The courtroom stirred as Keisha's composure cracked. This wasn't the polished surgeon anymore. This was a woman facing the person who had taught her that she was worthy of love. "Your Honor," Keisha continued, steadying her voice, "I'd like to tell you about the first night I slept in Rose Washington's house. I was 13, hadn't bathed in weeks, was wearing clothes I'd stolen from a donation box. I expected her to change her mind, to call social services, to decide I was too much trouble." Rose remembered that night, how Keisha had sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed, refusing to lie down because she was convinced Rose would throw her out before morning. "Instead," Keisha went on, "she made me hot chocolate. Real hot chocolate, not the powdered kind. And she sat with me until I fell asleep, just humming old church songs. When I woke up the next morning, there were clean clothes on the dresser and the smell of bacon coming from the kitchen." "Objection." Peterson tried again, but his voice lacked conviction now. Judge Coleman held up a hand. "I'll allow it. Continue, Dr. Williams. She didn't ask where I'd been or what had happened to me. She just loved me, fed me, made sure I went to school. When I said I wanted to be a doctor, she worked double shifts at the diner to buy me science books. When I got accepted to college with a full scholarship, she cried harder than I did." Michael stepped forward. "Your Honor, I was headed down a very different path when Mama Rose found me. Anger, violence, that was my language. I was 11 years old and ready to hurt anyone who looked at me wrong. But Rose Washington saw something else." Rose closed her eyes, remembering the night she'd found Michael fighting 3 older boys in an alley, his face bloody but his fists still swinging. "She didn't try to fix me," Michael continued. "She just showed me what love looked like, what stability felt like. She taught me that strength wasn't about hurting people. It was about protecting them. That lesson made me the prosecutor I am today." David's voice was quiet, but carried clearly through the courtroom. "And I was broken. Completely, utterly broken. I hadn't spoken in months when social services brought me to her. Traumatic selective mutism, they called it. Said I might never speak again." Rose remembered the silent boy who used to follow her around the house like a shadow, never making a sound. But Mama Rose didn't need me to talk. She talked to me anyway, read me stories, sang to me, and slowly, one word at a time, she brought me back to life. I'm a lawyer today because she taught me the power of words and the power of silence when silence was all I had. Judge Coleman leaned back in her chair, studying the scene before her. "And where have you all been? If Mrs. Washington was so important to you, why wasn't this testimony available during the trial?" The 3 exchanged glances, and Rose saw the guilt they'd been carrying. "Because we're cowards," Keisha said simply. "Because we got successful and forgot to look back. Because we told ourselves she was strong enough to handle anything. Because we were ashamed that we'd let life pull us away from the woman who gave us life." "We only found out about the trial yesterday," David added. "A friend of a friend saw the news report. We drove through the night to get here." Peterson made one last attempt. "Your Honor, none of this changes the facts of the case. The defendant still." "The defendant," Judge Coleman said quietly, "apparently raised 3 extraordinary human beings while working multiple jobs in one of the city's most dangerous neighborhoods. Dr. Williams, what exactly did Mrs. Washington do that landed her in this courtroom?" Keisha's jaw tightened. "She did what she always did, Your Honor. She protected children. 20 years earlier, 3 kids, the oldest maybe 13, were pressed against the wall of a diner where Rose worked like they were trying to melt into the bricks. The girl in the middle had her arms wrapped around 2 smaller boys, her eyes fierce with the kind of protective instinct that broke Rose's heart. "We ain't doing nothing wrong," the girl said, her voice carrying false bravado that fooled exactly no one. "We're just waiting for somebody." Rose recognized the lie immediately. She'd told it herself too many times as a child. "Honey, it's almost midnight and it's pouring rain. Ain't nobody coming for you in this weather." The girl's chin jutted out defiantly. "You don't know nothing about us. I know you're cold. I know you're hungry. And I know that boy there. Rose pointed to the smallest child, who couldn't have been more than 9. Needs to get somewhere warm before that cough turns into pneumonia. The little boy looked up at her with huge dark eyes, and Rose felt something shift in her chest. He was Asian, she realized, with a round face and hair that stuck up in wet spikes. The other boy, maybe 11, looked Hispanic and was trying hard not to shiver in his too-thin jacket. David, the girl whispered to the youngest. Don't look at her. We talked about this. David. The name suited him somehow. Rose crouched down to their level, ignoring the rain soaking through her coat. What's your name, sweetheart? Keisha. The girl answered before she could stop herself, then immediately looked angry at the slip. Keisha. Rose let the name settle between them. That's a beautiful name. My mama had a friend named Keisha. She was the strongest woman I ever knew, besides my mama herself. The girl's armor cracked just slightly. Yeah, well, your mama's friend probably didn't end up sleeping in alleys. Actually, she did. Rose's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. For about 6 months when she was 14. Then my mama took her in. Changed both their lives. The middle boy, Michael, though Rose didn't know his name yet, finally spoke. Your mama taking strays? My mama took in family, Rose corrected. Sometimes blood family, sometimes chosen family. She always said there was no difference once love got involved. Keisha's grip on the boys tightened. Lady, we appreciate the philosophy lesson or whatever, but we're fine. We take care of each other. Rose studied the 3 of them. Their too-thin faces, the way they huddled together for warmth, the careful positioning that put Keisha between the boys and any potential threat. They were survivors, these 3. But survival wasn't the same as living. When's the last time you ate? She asked. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Finally, Michael's stomach answered for him, growling loud enough to hear over the rain. Rose made a decision that would change for lives forever. My apartment's 6 blocks from here. I got leftover meatloaf, some macaroni and cheese. Hot shower, clean towels. You all can stay the night, get dry and fed, and tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. We don't know you, Keisha said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. No, you don't. But you know what being hungry feels like. You know what being cold feels like. And you know that boy there needs medicine for that cough. Rose stood up, water dripping from her coat. Sometimes strangers are just family you haven't met yet. David looked up at Keisha with those enormous eyes. I'm really cold, Keisha. The girl's resolve crumbled. Rose could see the moment it happened. The exact second when the weight of caring for 2 younger children became too much for 13-year-old shoulders to carry alone. If you try anything weird, Keisha started. Honey, I'm 43 years old, I work 16-hour days, and I'm so tired I can barely see straight. The weirdest thing I'm likely to do is fall asleep standing up. Rose pulled out her flip phone and showed them the screen. This is my neighbor Miss Patterson's number. First sign of trouble, you call her. She'll have the police here in 5 minutes, and she will personally come kick my behind from here to Sunday. Michael stood up slowly, his legs stiff from sitting in the cold. You for real? About the food? Michael, no. Keisha tried to pull him back down. I'm hungry, Keisha. I'm so hungry it hurts. Rose felt her heart break a little more. Yes, baby. I'm for real about the food. About all of it. David struggled to his feet, his small hand clutching Keisha's arm. Please, Keisha. Just for tonight. Keisha looked between the 2 boys, then up at Rose. The rain had plastered her hair to her head, making her look even younger than 13. In that moment, Rose saw past the tough girl act to the scared child underneath. A child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, to make decisions no kid should have to make. One night, Keisha said finally. But if you're some kind of crazy person, then you'll handle it, Rose finished with a small smile. I can see that already. As they walked through the storm toward Rose's apartment, She had no idea she was walking toward the most important chapter of her life. She only knew that 3 children needed help, and helping children was something her heart couldn't refuse. Behind them, the alley where they'd been hiding filled with rainwater, washing away the temporary shelter they'd built from cardboard and determination. Ahead of them, a small apartment waited, and with it, the beginning of a family none of them had planned, but all of them needed. Rose's apartment felt smaller with 4 people in it, but somehow warmer too. As she unlocked the door to her 1-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor, she tried to see it through the children's eyes. The second-hand furniture, the patched linoleum, the way she had to jiggle the light switch just right to make it work. "It ain't much," she said, helping David out of his soaked jacket. "But it's home." Keisha stood in the doorway, still wary, her eyes cataloguing every exit route. But Michael had already gravitated toward the small kitchenette, drawn by the lingering sense of morning coffee and the cinnamon candle Rose lit every evening to mask the building's mustier odors. "You really live here by yourself?" Michael asked, running his fingers along the clean countertop. "Just me and Jesus," Rose replied, hanging their wet clothes over the radiator. "Though I talk to him enough that the neighbors probably think I got company all the time." David giggled, the first sound of joy she'd heard from any of them. The laugh transformed his face, reminding Rose that underneath the trauma and fear, he was still just a little boy. "Let's get you all warmed up first, then we'll eat." Rose pulled towels from her linen closet, the good ones she usually saved for company that never came. "David baby, you're smallest, so you get the shower first. Keisha, there's some of my old clothes in that dresser that might fit you. Michael, you and I are about to raid my brother's closet." "You got a brother?" Keisha asked, accepting the towel, but not the implicit trust that came with it. "Had. Jerome passed 2 years ago, but I kept some of his things." Rose's voice carried only a slight tremor. "He was about your size when he was 11, Michael. Might be something in there that works." As David disappeared into the bathroom, Rose began moving through her evening routine with 3 additional people in mind. Extra bedding from the closet, the good pillows from her own bed, rearranging furniture to create sleeping spaces in the living room. "You don't got to do all this," Keisha said quietly, watching Rose work. "We can sleep on the floor. We're used to it." Rose paused in her pillow fluffing. "Honey, just because you're used to something don't mean you should have to keep doing it. Not when there's a better way." "Ain't always gonna be a better way," Keisha replied, but her tone had lost its earlier hostility. "Maybe not always, but tonight there is." The sound of running water from the bathroom made them both smile. David was singing, something wordless and sweet that echoed off the tile walls. "He does that when he feels safe," Michael offered from where he was examining the family photos on Rose's bookshelf. "Sings, I mean. He used to do it all the time, before everything got bad." Rose studied the boy, who was trying so hard to be older than his 11 years. "What happened to y'all? I mean, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but..." "Foster care happened," Keisha said bluntly. "Different families, but they all had the same problems. Money problems, drinking problems, or..." She trailed off, her jaw tight. "Other problems," Michael finished, his young voice carrying too much understanding. Rose felt familiar anger rising in her chest. The same fury that had driven her to work with church groups trying to reform the system, to volunteer at shelters, to give what little she could to organizations that actually cared about children. But anger wouldn't help these 3 tonight. "Well, you're here now," she said simply. "And you're safe." When David emerged from the bathroom 20 minutes later, he looked like a different child. Clean and warm, wearing one of Rose's oversized t-shirts like a nightgown, his damp hair curling around his ears. The cough was still there, but gentler now. "Miss Rose." His voice was small, uncertain. "The water got cold, but I didn't use it all up on purpose." Rose's heart clenched. What kind of places had these children been living, where they had to apologize for using hot water? Baby, you use all the hot water you need. That's what it's for. She guided him to the couch and wrapped him in her softest blanket. Michael, your turn. And don't you worry about the water either. While Michael showered, Rose heated up leftover meatloaf and macaroni, added some green beans from a can, and made a pitcher of sweet tea. Simple food, but she watched Keisha's eyes follow every movement, noting where things were kept, how the stove worked, cataloging information for future survival. You cook every day? Keisha asked. Most days. Eating out's expensive, and besides, my mama taught me that a home-cooked meal is like a hug from the inside. My mama used to say something like that. The words slipped out before Keisha could stop them, and Rose saw the girl's walls slam back up immediately. Used to. She's gone. Keisha's voice was flat, final. They're all gone. That's why we stick together now. The three of us, we're all we got. Rose wanted to argue, to tell this fierce young girl that she had more than she knew, but something in Keisha's posture warned against pushing too hard too fast. When Michael returned from his shower, swimming in Jerome's old clothes but grinning widely, Rose served dinner on her good plates, the ones with tiny flowers around the rim that had been her grandmother's. They ate in relative silence at first, the children attacking their food with the desperate efficiency of people who never knew when the next meal might come. Rose pretended not to notice, focusing on her own plate while keeping mental note of who needed seconds, who was still hungry, who might need medicine for that lingering cough. Miss Rose. David's voice was thick with exhaustion and food. Can I ask you something? Anything, baby. Why did you help us? Like for real, why? Rose set down her fork, considering the question seriously. These children had been let down by adults too many times to accept a simple answer. You know how sometimes you see something, and it just feels right in your heart. Like when you see a sunset, or hear a really good song, or watch somebody be kind to someone else. She waited for their nods. That's what happened when I saw you all in that alley. My heart said, these are your children. And my heart don't lie to me very often. But we ain't really your children, Michael pointed out, though not unkindly. No, you're not. Not legally, anyway. But love don't always follow legal rules, baby. Sometimes love just is. Keisha had been quiet through this exchange, but now she looked up from her plate. What if we can't stay? What if somebody comes looking for us? Or what if? Then we'll handle it when it happens, Rose said firmly. But tonight you're here. You're safe. You're fed. And tomorrow's gonna take care of itself. As if summoned by her words, exhaustion finally claimed David. His head nodded forward, and Rose gently guided him to lie down on the couch, tucking the blanket around his small frame. He sleeps between us, Keisha said quickly, moving toward David protectively. Of course he does. Rose began gathering the dishes. You'll work out however you need to sleep. I'll be right here if anybody needs anything. You're not going to bed? Michael asked. Rose smiled, thinking of the long day ahead. Another double shift, bills to pay, groceries to buy for 4 people instead of 1. I'll sleep in a bit. I'm not tired yet. It was a lie, but a necessary one. She wanted to be awake when the nightmares came, when one of them woke up scared and disoriented, when the reality of their situation hit them in the dark hours before dawn. As the children settled into their makeshift beds, Rose sat in her worn armchair and watched over them. 3 broken children who had somehow found their way to her door. 3 lives that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, sacrifice, and what it meant to be a family. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to pass, but inside Rose's small apartment, something new was just beginning to grow. Have you ever had someone show you unconditional love when you needed it most? Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes in our lives. What moment of unexpected kindness changed your perspective? Share below. 3 months had passed since that rainy night, and Rose's 1-bedroom apartment had transformed into something that resembled controlled chaos. School backpacks hung by the door, 3 different sizes of shoes lined up beneath the coat rack, and the refrigerator was covered with David's drawings, Michael's math tests, all A's, and Keisha's carefully written lists, schedules, chores, and what Rose had come to recognize as the girl's way of maintaining control in a world that had taught her trust was dangerous. The social worker, Mrs. Henderson, had been surprisingly accommodating when Rose called to report that she was caring for 3 children who needed help. Emergency foster placement, temporary custody arrangements, mountains of paperwork. Rose had navigated it all while working her 2 jobs and somehow managing to be present for homework, bedtime stories, and the 1,000 small crises that came with raising children who had survived too much. "Miss Rose, we're out of milk again," Keisha called from the kitchen, her 13-year-old voice carrying the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to inventory resources. Rose looked up from the bills spread across her kitchen table and sighed. Groceries for 4 people cost 3 times what she'd budgeted for 1, and the electric bill had nearly doubled with 3 additional people showering, doing homework with lights on, and David's need for a nightlight in every room. "I'll pick some up on my way home from work tomorrow," Rose called back, making a mental note to skip lunch again. The diner gave employees 1 free meal per shift, and Rose had gotten creative about stretching that into leftovers. "I could get it," Michael offered from where he sat at the small table, struggling with his science homework. "There's that corner store on 5th Street that—" "Absolutely not." Rose's voice was firm but gentle. At 11, Michael had already developed protective instincts that worried her. Too ready to take risks, too willing to venture into dangerous territory if it meant helping the family. "That store's in Dealer's Row, baby. You know the rules." The rules. They'd developed so many rules over the past 3 months, most of them centered around keeping the children safe in a neighborhood where safety was never guaranteed. No walking alone after dark. No talking to strangers who approached them directly. No shortcuts through certain alleys. And absolutely no going near the corner where the dealers worked. Rose had learned to recognize the signs, the lookouts posted on corners, the way certain blocks would suddenly empty when the wrong cars drove through, the coded conversations that meant danger was coming. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 6 years, but having children to protect had sharpened her awareness to a razor's edge. "Miss Rose." David's voice drifted from the living room, where he was building elaborate structures with the blocks she'd bought him from the thrift store. "Can you help me with something?" She left the bills. There'd be time to worry about money later, and found David sitting cross-legged on the floor, his brow furrowed in concentration. "What you working on, baby?" "I'm trying to build a house," he said seriously, "but it keeps falling down." Rose settled beside him, noting how his small hands shook slightly as he tried to stack the wooden blocks. The nightmares still came, though less frequently now. 3 months of regular meals and consistent bedtimes had helped, but the trauma lived in his body still, in the way he startled at sudden noises, in how he positioned himself near exits, in the careful way he hoarded small treasures under his pillow. "Sometimes the foundation's got to be extra strong to hold up the rest," Rose said gently, helping him adjust the base blocks. "What kind of house you trying to build?" "A safe one," David said simply, "with lots of rooms so nobody has to sleep outside anymore." The innocent statement hit Rose like a physical blow. She pulled him into her lap, inhaling the scent of the children's shampoo she now bought in bulk. "You're safe now, David. All of you. I promise." It was a promise that was getting harder to keep. The neighborhood was changing, and not for the better. The dealers were getting younger, more brazen, more violent. Just last week, she'd found needles in the playground where David liked to swing after school. The week before that, gunshots had shattered her bedroom window at 2 a.m., sending all 3 children diving for cover with a speed that broke her heart. "Miss Rose." Keisha appeared in the doorway, her expression worried. "There's somebody at the door." Rose's blood chilled. Evening visitors in this neighborhood rarely brought good news. She settled David back with his blocks and moved toward the front door, noting how all three children automatically positioned themselves behind her. Through the peephole, she saw Tyrone Williams, neighborhood kid who'd dropped out of school at 16 and now worked corners for whoever was currently controlling the local drug trade. He was barely 18, skinny as a rail, with eyes that had seen too much too young. Tyrone. Rose opened the door, but kept the chain engaged. What you doing here, baby? Miss Rose, I need to talk to you. His voice was urgent, scared. Can I come in? You alone? Yeah, I'm alone. But Miss Rose, you got to listen to me. You and the kids, you'll need to leave. Tonight. Rose's heart started hammering, but she kept her voice steady. Why? What's happening? New crew moving in from Atlanta. They heard about you calling the police last month when they started recruiting kids at the elementary school. They saying you're bad for business. The phone call. Rose remembered it clearly. She'd watched from her window as grown men approached a group of third graders, offering money for simple errands. She'd called 911 without hesitation. They're coming for you, Miss Rose. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. But they're coming. Behind her, Rose could hear the children's breathing, could feel their fear even though they couldn't hear Tyrone's words. Tyrone, honey, where am I supposed to go? This is my home. These babies need stability. Miss Rose, please. Tyrone's voice cracked. You helped my little sister when she was sick, remember? Got her that medicine when Mama couldn't afford it? I can't let them hurt you. But I can't protect you either. Nobody can protect you from these dudes. Rose looked back at the three children who'd become her world. Keisha stood protectively in front of the boys, her young face set in grim determination. Michael had positioned himself near the kitchen, probably calculating which knives could be used as weapons. And David. David was clutching his blocks, the house he'd been building scattered at his feet. How much time do I have? Rose asked quietly. Maybe till morning. Maybe less. Rose made a decision that would haunt her for the next 20 years. Okay. Thank you for warning me, baby. You be safe out there. She closed the door and turned to face three pairs of frightened eyes. Pack everything you can carry, she said calmly. We're going to spend a few days with Miss Patterson upstairs. Are we in trouble? David's voice was small, confused. Rose knelt down and gathered all three children into her arms. No, baby. You're not in trouble. But sometimes people who don't like goodness try to hurt good people. And I will not let anyone hurt my family. As they packed their few belongings into grocery bags and backpacks, Rose made phone calls. Miss Patterson agreed to let them stay, but her apartment was tiny. A single room barely big enough for one person, let alone four. It wouldn't be a long-term solution. Miss Rose. Keisha's voice was steady, but Rose could hear the fear underneath. Are we going to have to go back? To foster care, I mean. Rose stopped packing and looked at this brave girl who'd been let down by so many adults. Not if I can help it, she said firmly. We're family now. Families stick together. But even as she said it, Rose knew she was making a promise she might not be able to keep. The money was running out, the danger was escalating, and three children deserved better than a life spent running from violence. That night, crowded into Miss Patterson's single room with their possessions stuffed into bags, Rose lay awake listening to the children's breathing and making impossible calculations. How do you keep children safe when safety costs more than you have? How do you build a stable home when the ground keeps shifting beneath your feet? Outside, she could hear cars cruising slowly through the streets, voices calling out in coded language, the subtle sounds of a neighborhood under siege. By morning, she would have to make choices that would change all their lives forever. But tonight, they were together. Tonight, they were safe. Tonight, love was enough. Tomorrow would demand sacrifices she wasn't sure she was strong enough to make. 5 years later, the acceptance letter from Stanford University lay on Rose's kitchen table like a golden ticket to a future she'd only dreamed possible for Keisha. The scholarship was full: tuition, room, board, even a stipend for books and supplies. Everything an 18-year-old needed to transform her life completely. Everything except the courage to leave the woman who'd saved her. "I'm not going," Keisha said for the third time that morning. Her arms crossed as she stood by the window overlooking the courtyard where David and Michael were shooting basketball with some neighborhood kids. At 18, she'd grown into a striking young woman, her intelligence sharp as a blade, her protective instincts honed by years of being the eldest. "They need me here. You need me here." Rose continued folding laundry, keeping her hands busy so Keisha wouldn't see them trembling. 5 years of raising 3 children, while working double shifts, had taken their toll. Her hair was almost completely grey now, her back ached constantly, and some mornings she had to sit on the edge of the bed for a full minute before her joints would cooperate enough to stand. "Baby, what I need is for you to stop being stubborn and start packing." "Mama Rose." "Don't Mama Rose me." Rose's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years mediating arguments, breaking up fights, and making impossible decisions. "We've been over this. Stanford University, Keisha. Do you understand what that means? It means leaving you all behind. It means becoming a doctor. It means being able to help people. It means," Rose's voice caught slightly, "it means having the life you deserve." Through the window, they could hear David's laughter as he attempted a shot that bounced off the rim. At 14, he'd grown tall and lanky, his trauma buried deep but not forgotten. He still slept with a nightlight, still startled at unexpected sounds, but he smiled now. He trusted now. And he was brilliant. Not just smart, but brilliant in ways that made his teachers call Rose for conferences where they used words like gifted and exceptional. Michael, now 16, had developed into a serious young man with a fierce sense of justice and an uncanny ability to see through people's pretenses. He wanted to be a lawyer, spent hours at the public library reading case studies and legal precedents. Rose suspected he'd chosen law because he'd seen too many injustices go unpunished, too many good people get crushed by systems that didn't care about individual stories. "They're going to be fine," Rose said, though the words felt like glass in her throat. "Michael's got 2 more years of high school, then he'll get his own scholarships. David's only in 9th grade, but his grades are perfect. They don't need you to babysit them anymore. They need family. We all need family." Rose set down the shirt she'd been folding and turned to face the young woman who'd become like a daughter to her. "Keisha, honey, what do you think family does? Family makes sure everyone gets the best possible chance at life. Family sacrifices so other people can soar. You've already sacrificed enough." It was true, though Rose would never admit it. 5 years of stretching every dollar, working jobs that destroyed her body, living in constant worry about money, safety, and whether she was doing right by these children. 5 years of putting her own dreams, the ones she'd barely had time to form, on hold so 3 broken kids could have a chance to heal. The apartment around them bore witness to those sacrifices. The furniture was still second-hand, still patched and repatched. Rose's bedroom had been converted to a study space years ago. She slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. Her own clothes were worn thin, but the children always had what they needed: school supplies, decent shoes, warm coats in winter. "Keisha," Rose's voice was gentler now, "come sit with me." They settled on the couch where Rose had slept for 5 years, the same couch where she'd rocked David through nightmares, where she'd helped Michael with homework, where she'd braided Keisha's hair and listened to teenager problems that felt enormous and devastating. "You remember that first night?" Rose asked. "When you were so scared, and you kept expecting me to change my mind about helping you?" Keisha nodded, her eyes already bright with unshed tears. "You remember what I told you about love? About how it don't follow legal rules? You said sometimes love just is." "That's right. And love that just is. That's the kind that don't get smaller when it spreads out. That's the kind that grows stronger when you take it with you wherever you go. But what if I forget? What if I get out there in that fancy school, and I forget where I came from, forget what you taught me? Rose reached for Keisha's hands, noting how soft they were now compared to those first rough months. These were hands that had been cared for, hands that had been free to hold books instead of weapons, hands that would someday save lives. Baby, you couldn't forget if you tried. You think Michael's gonna forget? You think David's gonna forget? The love we built here, it's not something you leave behind. It's something you carry forward. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Rose's heart skipped. 5 years later, unexpected visitors still made her nervous. But this was Mrs. Chun from downstairs, holding an envelope. Rose, honey, this came for Keisha. Looked important. The return address made Keisha gasp. Princeton University. A second acceptance letter, this one from Michael's dream school, offering Keisha a place in their pre-med program with a research assistantship. 2 schools, Rose breathed, looking at the letters spread across the table. 2 full rides. Baby, do you understand how extraordinary you are? I understand that I'm scared, Keisha whispered. What if I can't do it without you? What if I'm not as strong as you think I am? Rose pulled Keisha into her arms, this young woman who'd been forced to grow up too fast, but who'd never lost her capacity for love. Keisha, you were strong enough to keep 2 little boys alive on the streets when you were barely a teenager yourself. You're strong enough for anything. Outside, Michael and David were calling for Keisha to come play basketball. Their voices were full of joy, completely unaware that their world was about to change again. When would I have to leave? Keisha asked quietly. Fall semester starts in 6 weeks. That's not enough time. It's never enough time, Rose said sadly. But it's the time we have. Over the next hour, they talked through logistics, fears, and dreams. Rose promised to visit when she could afford it, though they both knew money would be tight. Keisha promised to call every Sunday, though they both knew college would be demanding. They made plans that felt both too concrete and too fragile. As the afternoon wore on, Michael and David came upstairs, sweaty and happy from their game. Rose watched Keisha's face as she broke the news, saw the way the boys' expressions shifted from excitement to confusion to a kind of grief that broke her heart. You're leaving us? David's voice was small, echoing the 9-year-old who'd once built houses out of blocks. I'm not leaving you, Keisha said firmly. I'm going to become someone who can take better care of you. All of you. That night, as they sat around their small table eating dinner, Rose looked at the 4 of them and tried to memorize the moment. Soon it would be 3, then 2, then maybe just her again. The apartment would feel too big and too quiet. But the love they'd built, that would live on in every life these children touched, in every person they helped, in every choice they made with kindness instead of fear. We're proud of you, Michael said suddenly, his 16-year-old voice cracking slightly. Scared but proud. We're family, David added, echoing words he'd heard Rose say 1,000 times. Family means being happy when someone gets to fly, even when you miss them. Rose felt tears threaten and blinked them back. These children, her children, had learned the hardest lesson of love. Sometimes letting go is the most generous thing you can do. 6 weeks later, she would drive Keisha to the airport with $200 in cash, everything she could spare, and a heart full of pride and terror. 2 years after that, Michael would leave for Georgetown with a full scholarship and dreams of changing the world. For years later, David would head to MIT with innovations already dancing in his brilliant mind. And Rose would wave goodbye to each of them, knowing she'd given them everything she had to give. 2 years before the courtroom. At 61, Rose had thought she'd seen the worst of what the neighborhood could offer. She'd been wrong. The dealers weren't just younger now, they were crueler, more desperate. The old codes of conduct, the unspoken rules about staying away from playgrounds and elementary schools, had crumbled along with everything else. Children as young as 10 were being recruited as lookouts and runners, their small hands perfect for hiding drugs in places police wouldn't think to search. Rose had called the police 17 times in the past 6 months. Each time, they'd arrive hours later, take a report, and leave. Each time, the dealers would return within days, bolder and more brazen than before. The apartment felt tomb quiet without the children's voices. Keisha was in her 3rd year at Stanford, Michael was finishing his senior year at Georgetown, and David was thriving at MIT. They called when they could, but their lives were full of classes, internships, and the bright futures Rose had sacrificed everything to give them. They didn't know she'd been laid off from the diner when Mel finally sold to a chain that didn't need experienced waitresses, just young girls who could work for minimum wage and smile pretty. They didn't know her cleaning job had been eliminated when the office building automated their janitorial services. They didn't know she was 3 months behind on rent and surviving on food stamps and the occasional odd job. Most importantly, they didn't know about the children. It had started small. A 7-year-old named Jasmine whose mother worked 3 jobs and couldn't get home before midnight. Rose would see the little girl sitting on the front steps of their building, waiting in the dark, and her heart couldn't leave her there. Then came Marcus, whose grandmother was too sick to get out of bed, but too proud to ask for help. Then Aisha and her baby brother, whose teenage mother was trying to finish high school while working at a fast food restaurant. 5 children, ranging in age from 18 months to 10 years, who needed somewhere safe to go after school and on weekends. 5 children whose parents were struggling just like Rose had struggled, trying to make impossible choices between work and childcare, between paying rent and buying groceries. Rose couldn't turn them away. Even with no steady income, even with her own future uncertain, she couldn't watch children suffer when she had the space and the love to help. The problem was that helping them meant breaking rules. Her lease prohibited subletting or running a daycare. The state required licenses and inspections for anyone caring for more than 3 non-related children. The neighbors complained about the noise, the mess, the constant stream of worried parents dropping off and picking up their babies. But the real problem was Anthony "Aunt" Morrison. Aunt was 17, built like a linebacker, and running the most profitable drug operation the neighborhood had ever seen. He'd grown up on these streets, knew every shortcut and hiding place, every parent's weakness, and every child's vulnerability. He was smart, ruthless, and had decided that Rose Washington was bad for business. "You see too much, old lady," he'd told her 3 weeks ago, cornering her outside the bodega where she bought groceries with food stamps. "You call the cops too much. You got kids running in and out of your place all day, making noise, drawing attention. It's affecting my operation." "Those children need somewhere safe to be," Rose had replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Those children got parents. Ain't your job to save everybody. It's my job to protect children. Always has been." Aunt had smiled then, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "We'll see about that." The threats had escalated over the following weeks. Graffiti appeared on the building's walls overnight. Rose's mailbox was destroyed twice. Her tires were slashed. Someone threw a brick through Mrs. Patterson's window upstairs. A clear message that Rose's choices were endangering her neighbors too. But Rose couldn't abandon the children. Every afternoon, they'd arrive at her door with homework and hungry bellies, and the kind of trust that came from having nowhere else to go. She'd help with math problems, referee arguments, make sandwiches from whatever she could afford, and pretend she wasn't terrified of what might happen next. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Rose was helping 8-year-old Marcus with his reading when she heard shouting from the playground. Through her window, she saw Aunt and 3 of his crew surrounding a group of elementary school kids. Money changing hands, small packages being distributed. Rose didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed the baseball bat she'd started keeping by the door, Jerome's old Louisville Slugger from high school, and marched outside. "Get away from those children," she shouted, her voice carrying across the playground with the authority of someone who'd spent decades protecting the vulnerable. Ant turned slowly, his expression shifting from surprise to amusement. Look who decided to be a hero. I said get away from them. And I said mind your own business, old lady. These kids made a choice. They want to make some money. That's between them and me. Rose looked at the children. Babies, really, some no older than David had been when she first found him, and saw their fear beneath the false bravado. They'd been offered money for simple errands, the same trap that had snared countless kids before them. They're children, Rose said firmly, and I won't let you destroy their lives. You won't let me? Ant laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, you got about 5 seconds to turn around and go back inside before this gets real ugly. Rose gripped the bat tighter. Behind Ant, his crew was positioning themselves, hands moving toward concealed weapons. The children scattered, running toward the safety of their homes, leaving Rose alone facing 4 armed drug dealers with nothing but her anger and Jerome's old baseball bat. I'm calling the police, she announced, pulling out her flip phone. Go ahead, Ant said. By the time they get here, ain't gonna be nothing to see. Rose dialed 911 with shaking fingers, never taking her eyes off Ant's crew. When the dispatcher answered, Rose spoke clearly into the phone, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is Rose Washington at 1247 Magnolia Street. I need police immediately. Armed drug dealers are threatening children in the playground. That's when Ant moved. He lunged forward, grabbing for the phone, and Rose swung the bat without thinking. The wooden Louisville slugger connected with his shoulder, sending him stumbling backward with a cry of pain and rage. You crazy bitch! Ant roared, his right arm hanging useless at his side. You broke my fucking shoulder. His crew was moving now, weapons appearing from jacket pockets and waistbands. Rose stood her ground, the bat raised for another swing, knowing she was about to die, but unable to run. Somewhere behind her, she could hear sirens in the distance. Too far away to help, but getting closer. Shoot her, Ant gasped, cradling his injured arm. Shoot this crazy old bitch right now. Time slowed. Rose saw the gun rising, saw the young man's finger tightening on the trigger, saw the end of everything she'd worked for, and fought for rushing toward her at the speed of bullets. But the shot never came. Police cars flooded the playground, officers shouting commands, weapons drawn. In the chaos that followed, arrests, ambulances, statements given and reports filed. Rose found herself sitting in the back of a patrol car, not as a victim, but as a suspect. Assault with a deadly weapon. The charge hit her like a physical blow. The baseball bat, Jerome's old Louisville slugger, was now evidence in a case against her. Ant Morrison, drug dealer and predator, was now the victim of an unprovoked attack by a dangerous woman with a history of interfering with legitimate business. But he was selling drugs to children. Rose had protested to anyone who would listen. Did you see money change hands? The arresting officer had asked. I saw him threatening them. Did you hear him explicitly offer drugs? I know what I saw. What you saw, ma'am, was you attacking a young man with a baseball bat. The system that had failed to protect her neighborhood's children had no trouble protecting its predators. Ant Morrison had good lawyers, paid for with drug money. He had witnesses who swore he was just talking to the kids about staying in school. He had medical records showing significant injury from Rose's unprovoked attack. Rose had a public defender who barely looked at her case file, and the testimony of children whose parents were too frightened to let them speak in court. 2 years later, she would sit in courtroom 4B, facing a life sentence for trying to protect the innocent. 2 years later, she would believe that all her sacrifices had been for nothing, that love and justice were luxuries the poor couldn't afford. She had no way of knowing that 3,000 miles away, 3 young adults were frantically making travel arrangements, driving through the night to reach the woman who'd saved them first. She had no way of knowing that love, once planted, grows roots deeper than any prison can reach. Back in the courtroom, Judge Coleman leaned forward in her chair, her weathered hands clasped together as she studied the three successful adults standing before her. The courtroom had grown completely silent, save for the soft sound of Rose's quiet weeping. "Dr. Williams," the judge said slowly, "you stated that Mrs. Washington was charged with protecting her community from drug dealers. But according to the court record, she was found guilty of assault with a deadly weapon against a 17-year-old boy." Keisha's jaw tightened, and Rose could see the surgeon's precision in how she chose her words. "Your Honor, that 17-year-old boy is Anthony Morrison. Perhaps you'd like to review his arrest record?" David stepped forward, his expensive suit and confident bearing a stark contrast to the terrified 9-year-old Rose remembered. "Your Honor, if I may, I've taken the liberty of compiling Mr. Morrison's criminal history." He produced a thick folder from his briefcase. 37 arrests since the age of 14. Drug distribution, weapons charges, assault, intimidation of witnesses. He's currently serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison for running a drug operation that specifically targeted elementary school children. Peterson, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, Mr. Morrison's subsequent criminal activity doesn't justify." "It justifies everything," Michael interrupted, his prosecutor's training evident in how he commanded the room. "Your Honor, I've spent the last 48 hours reviewing this case, and what I've found is a travesty of justice that should shame this entire system." Judge Coleman raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation, Dr. Torres. It's a serious situation." Michael approached the bench, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in courtrooms. "Rose Washington called police 17 times about drug activity in her neighborhood. 17 times, she reported dealers recruiting children. 17 times, the system failed to respond adequately." Rose watched in amazement as Michael, her quiet, stuttering Michael, dominated the courtroom with the same fierce intelligence she'd nurtured through homework sessions and bedtime stories. "The night of the incident," Michael continued, "Mrs. Washington witnessed Morrison and his crew distributing drugs to children as young as 7 years old. When she intervened to protect those children, she was attacked and defended herself with the only weapon available, a baseball bat." "The court record shows," Peterson began. "The court record shows that not one of the child witnesses was allowed to testify," David interjected, his voice cutting through the prosecutor's objection like a blade. "Their parents were threatened, intimidated, told their children would be targeted if they cooperated with authorities." Judge Coleman looked down at the case file, her expression troubled. "Is this accurate, Counselor Peterson?" Peterson's face had gone pale. "Your Honor, witness intimidation is difficult to prove, but easy to accomplish," Keisha said quietly, "when the witnesses are children whose families live in the same neighborhood as the people being prosecuted." Rose felt something shifting in the courtroom's atmosphere, a subtle change that made her lift her head and truly look at her children for the first time since they'd arrived. They weren't just successful adults who'd once lived in her home. They were warriors, armed with education and experience, and an unshakable sense of justice that she had helped instill in them. "Your Honor," David said, opening another folder, "I've also obtained statements from 17 current and former residents of Mrs. Washington's neighborhood. Would you like me to read them?" Judge Coleman nodded slowly. David cleared his throat and began reading. From Maria Santos, mother of 3. "Rose Washington kept my children safe for 2 years while I worked night shifts at the hospital. She never asked for money, never complained when they stayed late, never made me feel like I was failing as a mother." Rose's vision blurred as David continued. From Janet Turner, "When my grandson was being recruited by dealers, Rose Washington stood between him and those men. She literally put her body between a child and danger, just like she did for everyone in our neighborhood." From Robert Chin, Rose Washington turned around the lives of dozens of children over the years. My daughter Lisa is in college now because Rose Washington tutored her for free and helped us fill out scholarship applications. As David read statement after statement, Rose realized that her life hadn't been invisible after all. All those afternoons helping with homework, all those evenings mediating neighborhood disputes, all those nights staying awake to make sure vulnerable children had somewhere safe to be. People had noticed. People had remembered. Your Honor, Keisha said when David finished reading. Rose Washington spent 20 years of her life lifting up everyone around her. She worked multiple jobs to support children who weren't hers. She sacrificed her own comfort, her own future, her own safety to make sure kids like us had a chance. Michael stepped closer to Rose's table, and she could see tears in his eyes. She taught us that love isn't something you keep for yourself. It's something you give away. She taught us that protecting children is worth any sacrifice. She taught us that one person can change the world, one child at a time. And when the system failed to protect those children, David added, his voice strong and clear, she did what she'd always done. She stepped up. She put herself in harm's way to keep kids safe. And for that, for being the same woman who saved dozens of lives over 2 decades, she was criminalized. Judge Coleman looked at Rose, then at the 3 advocates standing before her, then at the prosecutor who seemed to be shrinking into his expensive suit. Dr. Williams, Dr. Torres, Mr. Chun, what exactly are you asking this court to do? Keisha stepped forward, and Rose saw in her face the same fierce determination that had once kept 2 boys alive on the streets. We're asking you to see the truth, Your Honor. We're asking you to recognize that Rose Washington isn't a criminal. She's a hero. We're asking you to understand that the real crime here isn't what she did to protect children. The real crime is a system that prosecutes protectors and coddles predators. We're asking for justice, Michael added simply. We're asking for mercy, David concluded. The courtroom fell silent again. Rose could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of everyone's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. After 2 years of legal battles, after months of believing she was alone and forgotten, here were her children, her babies who'd grown into giants, fighting for her with everything they had. Judge Coleman looked down at the papers scattered across her bench, then back at the 3 advocates. I need to review this new information, she said finally. Court will recess for 1 hour while I consider these testimonies and examine the additional evidence you've presented. As the judge stood to leave, Rose finally found her voice. Your Honor. Judge Coleman paused. Yes, Mrs. Washington? Thank you, Rose whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you for listening. The judge's stern expression softened slightly. Mrs. Washington, the court's job is to ensure justice is served. That's what we're going to do today. As the courtroom emptied for recess, Rose found herself surrounded by the 3 people who meant everything to her. Keisha's arms went around her first, then Michael's, then David's, until she was enclosed in a circle of love she'd thought was lost forever. How did you find out? Rose asked through her tears. Tyrone Williams, Michael said. Remember him? He's clean now, working at a community center. He saw your case on the news and called us. We got here as fast as we could. You came back for me. Mama Rose, David said gently. We never really left. In that moment, Rose understood that love doesn't diminish with distance or time. Love grows, spreads, multiplies, comes back when you need it most. The children she'd raised in sacrifice and hope had become the adults who would save her in return. The circle was complete. 1 hour felt like a lifetime and an instant all at once. Rose sat in the courthouse hallway, flanked by her 3 children. She thought of them as children still, would always think of them as her babies no matter how successful or accomplished they became. Around them, the buzz of legal proceedings continued, but their small circle felt separate from the chaos, protected by invisible bonds forged in love and strengthened by time. Mama Rose, Keisha said softly, taking her weathered hand in her smooth surgeon's fingers. No matter what happens in there, you need to know something. Everything good in my life, everything I've become, every life I've saved in that operating room. It all started the night you found us in that alley. Rose squeezed her hand, marveling at how soft it was. These were hands that had learned to heal instead of hurt, hands that had been free to hold books instead of weapons, hands that saved children's lives every day because one woman had chosen love over fear 23 years ago. Michael, sitting on her other side, cleared his throat. I prosecuted a case last month, child trafficking ring. When we took down the operation and rescued those kids, all I could think about was you. About how you'd taught me that protecting the innocent isn't just a job, it's a calling. David, pacing nervously in front of them, stopped and knelt so he was eye level with Rose. I'm designing a new kind of housing project. Affordable apartments with built-in community spaces, after-school programs, medical clinics. I'm calling it Washington Commons. His voice broke slightly. After you. Rose felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. You all didn't have to. Yes, we did, all three said in unison, making her laugh despite everything. The bailiff appeared in the doorway. Court's back in session. As they filed back into courtroom 4B, Rose noticed the gallery was no longer empty. Word had somehow spread through the neighborhood, and the back rows were filled with faces she recognized. Parents whose children she'd helped, neighbors who'd witnessed her years of service, young adults who'd once been the kids she'd tutored and fed and loved. Mrs. Santos was there with her 3 children, all grown now. Robert Chen sat with his daughter Lisa, the one David had mentioned who was now in college. Even Tyrone Williams had come, his face older, but his eyes clear and sober. Judge Coleman took her seat and surveyed the crowded courtroom with surprise. I see we have some observers today. Your Honor, David said, rising from his seat. If I may, these are members of the community Mrs. Washington served for over 2 decades. They're here to support her. Peterson looked around nervously at the sea of supportive faces, then made one last attempt. Your Honor, while I understand the emotional nature of this situation, the law is clear. The defendant was found guilty of assault. Counselor Peterson, Judge Coleman's voice cut through his objection like ice. I've spent the last hour reviewing not only the case you presented, but also the evidence these advocates have brought to my attention. And I've come to some disturbing conclusions about how this case was prosecuted. Peterson's face went pale. It appears that crucial witness testimony was suppressed, that character evidence was deliberately excluded, and that the context of Mrs. Washington's actions was systematically minimized. Judge Coleman's voice carried the weight of judicial authority, but Rose could hear something else underneath. Anger at a system that had failed so completely. Your Honor, Peterson tried again. The jury found her guilty based on the evidence presented. Based on incomplete evidence, Judge Coleman corrected. Evidence that painted a picture so distorted it bore little resemblance to the truth. The judge turned to look at Rose directly. Mrs. Washington, would you please stand? Rose's legs felt unsteady as she rose, Keisha's hand supporting her elbow. This was it, the moment that would determine whether she spent the rest of her life in prison or walked out of this courtroom free. Mrs. Washington, this court has heard testimony today that paints a very different picture of your character and your actions than what was presented during your trial. We've heard from medical professionals, legal experts, and community members who describe you as someone who dedicated her life to protecting and nurturing children. Rose's heart hammered against her ribs. We've also learned that your so-called victim, Anthony Morrison, was indeed engaged in criminal activity that specifically targeted the children you were trying to protect. That the unprovoked attack you were convicted of was actually an act of defense, both of yourself and of vulnerable children. Judge Coleman paused, looking down at the papers on her bench. In light of this new evidence, and considering the gross miscarriage of justice that occurred during your original trial, This court hereby overturns your conviction." The words hit Rose like a physical blow. She felt her knees buckle, but strong hands, Keisha's, Michael's, David's, caught her and held her up. "Furthermore," Judge Coleman continued, her voice rising above the stunned murmur that rippled through the courtroom, "I am ordering an immediate investigation into the conduct of the original prosecution. It is clear that justice was not served in this case." "Your Honor," Peterson started to protest, but the judge held up her hand. "You are free to go, Mrs. Washington. This court apologizes for the injustice you have suffered and commends you for your years of service to your community." The courtroom erupted. Rose felt herself being lifted off the ground by 3 pairs of arms, held aloft by the children she'd saved who had grown up to save her in return. Around them, the gallery cheered and wept, a community celebrating the vindication of a woman who'd given everything for their children. "Mama Rose," David whispered in her ear, "you're free." "We're all free," she whispered back, understanding finally that freedom wasn't just about walking out of a courtroom. It was about love that endured, bonds that couldn't be broken, and the knowledge that what you plant in the hearts of children will bloom into forests of blessing. As they made their way out of the courthouse, Rose was surrounded by a crowd of people whose lives she'd touched. Children who were now adults, parents who'd never forgotten her kindness, neighbors who'd witnessed her sacrifices. They pressed close, offering congratulations, sharing memories, expressing gratitude for things large and small. But it was the 3 walking closest to her, Keisha, Michael, and David, who represented her greatest victory. Not because they'd saved her from prison, but because they'd become exactly what she'd always known they could be. Agents of love and justice in a world that desperately needed both. Outside the courthouse, in the warm afternoon sun, Rose looked up at the sky and felt her mother's presence, heard her voice one more time. Asterisk, Rose, baby, you can't save everybody. Asterisk, but you could save somebody. And sometimes, saving somebody meant saving everybody. Love planted in the right soil grew into forests that sheltered generations. "So," Keisha said, linking her arm through Rose's, "ready to come meet your grandchildren?" Rose's eyes widened. "Grandchildren?" Michael grinned, looking suddenly like the 11-year-old boy who used to steal cookies from her kitchen. "Did we forget to mention? Keisha's got twins, Marcus and Elena. I've got a son, Jerome, named after your brother. And David just got engaged to the most amazing woman. We've got a lot of catching up to do, Mama Rose," David added. "A lot of stories to share, a lot of living to celebrate." Rose looked at these 3 extraordinary people who'd once been broken children in an alley, and felt her heart expand with a joy so pure it took her breath away. The circle wasn't just complete. It was growing, spreading, creating new circles of love that would reach far beyond anything she could have imagined. As they walked toward the car that would take them home, all of them together, Rose whispered a prayer of gratitude to the universe that had led 3 homeless children to her door on a rainy night 23 years ago. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about romance. Sometimes they're about choosing to open your heart when the world tells you to close it, about planting seeds of hope in the darkest soil, about believing that love multiplies when it's given away freely. Sometimes they're about discovering that the children you save will grow up to save you right back. And sometimes, that's exactly how love is supposed to work.